Every coastline, every border, every civilization you ever studied was not shaped by human decisions. It was shaped by catastrophes so massive that nobody survived long enough to write them down. Not wars, not plagues, geological violence, climate collapses, walls of water moving faster than a passenger jet. The 5 events you are about to hear did not just kill people. They erased entire worlds and built new ones from the wreckage. This is the hidden geology of human history. Number 5. The Toba supervolcano, the day humanity almost ended. 74,000 years ago, the island of Sumatra in Indonesia tore itself apart. And when I say tore itself apart, I am not being dramatic. The Toba supervolcano rated an 8 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. That is the highest number the scale even has. To give you a reference point, the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, the one that flattened entire forests and killed 57 people, that was rated a 5. And each step on the scale is 10 times more powerful than the last. Toba was 1,000 times stronger than Mount St. Helens. The hole it left behind stretches 100 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide. Today it is the largest volcanic lake on Earth, a scar so enormous you can see it from space. But the crater was just the opening act. Billions of tons of sulfur dioxide shot into the upper atmosphere and formed this reflective layer that blocked sunlight from reaching the surface. Global temperatures dropped by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. In northern regions, some areas cooled by as much as 15 degrees. Growing seasons collapsed. Vegetation died across entire continents. Food chains fell apart from the bottom up. And for our species, this is where it gets hard to process. Here is something most people do not know. Human genetic diversity today is remarkably low, far lower than almost any other large mammal on the planet. Chimpanzees living in a single forest in Central Africa contain more genetic variation than all 8 billion of us combined. Scientists have spent decades trying to figure out why, and the answer, many of them believe, is Toba. Genetic evidence suggests that around 74,000 years ago, the total breeding population of humans on Earth crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. Not per continent, total, on the entire planet. Think about that for a second. Every single person alive today may descend from a group small enough to fill one sports stadium. We did not just face hard times after Toba. We came within a razor-thin margin of going permanently extinct. The volcanic winter lasted years, maybe a full decade. The people who survived endured conditions that by every reasonable calculation should have killed them too. And if the eruption had been just slightly larger, or the wind pattern slightly different, the human story ends right there, in the dark. 74,000 years before anyone invents writing. But it did not end there, and what came next was even stranger. Number 4. The Storegga Slide, the tsunami that erased a civilization. Around 8,150 years ago, a chunk of the Norwegian continental shelf the size of Scotland detached from the ocean floor without any warning and collapsed into the deep Atlantic. Just picture that for a moment. A piece of Earth the size of a country, sliding off the seabed in minutes. The Storegga Slide displaced roughly 3,500 cubic kilometers of sediment, one of the largest underwater landslides ever documented. And the water sitting above all that sediment had nowhere to go but outward, in every direction, fast. The tsunami it created was unlike anything in recorded history. Along Norway, waves hit an estimated 25 meters. The Shetland Islands got struck by walls of water whose traces geologists have found 80 meters above current sea level. Scotland's eastern coast took waves 20 meters high or taller. Sand deposits from the event have been found 80 kilometers inland from where the Scottish coast is today, carried there by an ocean that had absolutely no business being that far from shore. But the worst of it landed somewhere that does not exist on any modern map. Doggerland. You probably have never heard of it, but it matters. Doggerland was a vast lowland territory that once connected Britain directly to continental Europe. You could walk from what is now London to Amsterdam. For thousands of years, communities of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers lived there. They fished, they built, they raised families. It was their world, and their ancestors had lived on it for millennia. But after the last ice age, sea levels had been rising, slowly, century by century. By the time Storegga hit, Doggerland had already shrunk to a low-lying cluster of islands and marshes. The people still living there were clinging to the last fragments of a disappearing world. They had no high ground. They had no warning. They had no framework for understanding what was about to happen. When 20-meter waves crossed a landscape that barely sat above sea level, there was nothing left. The archaeological evidence for human habitation on those Doggerland remnants effectively vanishes after this point. Gone. One afternoon. The Storegga Slide did not just generate a tsunami, It delivered the final blow to a civilization that the ocean had been slowly swallowing for centuries. And it finished the job in a single day. But that is not the event that came closest to destroying the idea of civilization itself. That happened about 2,000 years later. Number 3. The 8.2 kiloyear event, when farming civilization nearly collapsed. Around 6,200 BC, an ice dam in what is now central Canada hit its breaking point. And behind that dam sat two massive glacial lakes, Agassiz and Ojibwe, holding a combined volume of fresh water roughly equal to half of all the modern Great Lakes. When the dam failed, that water drained into the North Atlantic. That enormous pulse of fresh water diluted the salty, dense water that drives the Atlantic's ocean circulation system. Think of it as the conveyor belt of currents that keeps Northern Europe warm enough to live in. That conveyor belt weakened dramatically. Global temperatures dropped 1 to 3 degrees Celsius. The North Atlantic region cooled by up to 5 degrees. Growing seasons shortened by weeks. Rain patterns shifted across multiple continents at the same time. And the cold lasted for approximately 160 years. This was not the Deep Ice Age, when humans survived as mobile hunter-gatherers who were already adapted to brutal conditions. By 6,200 BC, humans in the Fertile Crescent, the Levant, and southeastern Europe had committed to farming. They had built their entire existence around one assumption, that the seasons would stay predictable. That assumption broke overnight. Sudden abandonment. Large-scale migrations away from zones that could no longer support agriculture. Settlements that had been continuously occupied for generations, just empty, deserted. The evidence sits in the soil as what archaeologists call a disruption layer, a thin band of cultural silence between the world that existed before and the world that came after, and it can end faster than any civilization can adapt. And the civilizations that came after, the ones we actually remember from the history books, they learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Number 2. The Thera eruption, the volcano that killed Europe's first civilization. Around 3,600 years ago, the volcano at the center of what we now call Santorini, geologists call it Thera, detonated in one of the most violent eruptions of the last 10,000 years. The explosion ejected an estimated 60 cubic kilometers of material. For context, the 1883 Krakatoa eruption, the one that was heard from nearly 5,000 kilometers away, was 4 times smaller than this. The center of the island collapsed into the sea and created the crescent-shaped caldera that defines Santorini's coastline today. But the explosion was not the kill shot, the tsunami was. When the caldera collapsed, the ocean rushed in and then rushed back out. The resulting waves reached the northern coast of Crete, just 110 kilometers south, in about 30 minutes. Geological modeling suggests those waves were between 9 and 15 meters tall when they hit. And the civilization sitting on that coastline at that moment was the most sophisticated in all of European history. The Minoans. They had palace complexes so intricate that they still stun archaeologists. They had a written language. Their art, vivid frescoes of dolphins, athletes, and grand processions, would not be equaled anywhere in Europe for 1,000 years after they vanished. The tsunamis destroyed their northern harbors and coastal settlements. Their fleet, which was the economic and military backbone of everything they had built, was likely wiped out in a single afternoon. Within one generation, Minoan civilization entered terminal decline. Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland moved in. The Minoan language disappeared. The palace complexes went silent. A civilization that had thrived for over 1,000 years, erased because a mountain 110 kilometers away chose one afternoon to destroy everything built in its shadow. But even that was not the most devastating event. The worst one did not come with a bang at all. Number 1. The 4.2 kiloyear event, the drought that ended the Bronze Age. Around 2,200 BC, something shifted in Earth's atmospheric circulation, and the most powerful civilizations on the planet began dying simultaneously on 3 separate continents, without any of them understanding why. Start with Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire, the first true empire in recorded history, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, collapsed within decades. Excavations at the city of Tel Leilan in northeastern Syria uncovered a thriving urban center that was simply abandoned. No evidence of war, no signs of disease. The people just left. The desert moved in, and the city was buried under centuries of wind-blown dust. The cause was drought. A severe drying event turned the rain-fed agricultural heartland of northern Mesopotamia into wasteland. Cities that could not function without predictable rainfall could not function at all. But the Akkadian collapse was only one piece of something much larger. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom, the civilization that built the Great Pyramids, came apart. The Nile's annual floods, which had been the engine of Egyptian agriculture for centuries, failed repeatedly. A provincial governor named Ankitafi left inscriptions behind describing a country where the entire south was dying of hunger. The centralized power of the pharaohs fractured into competing regional authorities. Egypt entered what its own people would later remember as a dark age. And 4,000 kilometers to the east, the Indus Valley civilization, home to an estimated 5 million people across the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, entered its final decline. Monsoon patterns shifted, rivers weakened. Within 2 centuries, cities that had stood for 700 years were abandoned. 3 of the greatest civilizations in human history, 3 separate continents, 1 shared cause. A shift in global rainfall patterns, lasting roughly 200 to 300 years, was enough to simultaneously dismantle the most advanced societies on Earth. None of them understood what was happening. None of them knew the others were collapsing too. Each one experienced its own destruction as something local, inexplicable, and impossible to stop. The Earth does not negotiate with human ambition. It never has. Every coastline you have ever stood on, every civilization whose history you studied in school, every border on every map, all of it sits downstream of catastrophes most people have never heard of. The world was not handed to us stable and whole. It was rebuilt, over and over, from wreckage, by survivors who had no choice but to keep going, even when they had no idea what had just happened to them. That is the hidden geology underneath everything we call history. And the uncomfortable truth is, there is no reason to believe we are done.